and just be open. And relax the boundaries and the worries. And then imagine your whole self feeling really great, concentrated, meditative, at ease, but alert. And then imagine being at Menla in a hidden valley with a sort of magical quality of letting go of one's world description outside, all those worrisome things on CNN, MSNBC, Link TV, and whatever it is. And it's all like cacophony of illusions. And then imagine that medicine Buddha, which is what Menla means, this blue, a picture of it behind me, this blue-looking Buddha, dark blue Buddha, is a big, live one right in the sky up above your mind's eye. And around him, all sorts of doctors and physicians and great philosophers and spiritual beings and deities and angels and people in your own life, images or presences of people in your own life who you like, who you have felt benefited by, teachers perhaps, parents, friends. And imagine that they're all there in a kind of subtle reality host. And they're all smiling, looking at you meditating. You're sitting here in the Magic Valley. And the imagined divine ones and enlightened ones and saintly ones, whatever, and healing ones, radiate light rays as they smile. From their glistening, shining smiles come light rays in the dark blue, like lapis lazuli or sapphire light coming from the medicine Buddha, and then lots of threads of light coming from all this host of beings, with all of your sort of mentor beings. And this light flows to you, and it affirms your energy as a meditator, as an inquirer, as an investigator of your reality, as someone seeking the self, getting over the self, maybe reshaping, taking over the self as well, perhaps. Another kind of self. And you feel really good. And then imagine as well that all beings are around you in the valley. The valley becomes able to encompass countless numbers of beings, all in human form, since animals were humans in previous lives. The deities were humans in previous lives. Some humans were humans in previous lives. So all in human form. And they're looking at you, and as you fill up with the light of the medicine Buddha host, then you seem to be shining to the beings who are looking at you. In the front rows on the left are your loved ones, those who love you back, which is really nice to think of them being present in their subtle bodies, in their soul body, so to speak. And in the front, straight ahead, are acquaintances who you don't have strong affection for or dislike for. They're just acquaintances. And then on the front rows of the right-hand side, ones you're afraid of, you don't like, you may dislike, you may really resent, you fear, enemies, rivals, exes, and they're on the right-hand side. But all of them are looking at you. And the light that's reflecting from you, coming from the medicine host in the sky, reflects out equally to all of them, the negative ones and the positive ones, and the neutral ones. And they kind of intrigued, they like it. The loved ones, of course, like to see you shining. The acquaintances are intrigued to see their acquaintance kind of shining and sending kind of nice light rays toward them. And the enemies also like to steal your energy. They want to take it away, but anyway, they receive it and they like it. And they urge you to give them more. So you're getting a positive reinforcement from all of them, on whichever way they relate to you. Just as you send a kind of grateful feeling toward your imagined host of mentors, beings that have benefited you, or you imagine there could be historical beings that are long past in their course bodies, Socrates and Moses, Jesus, Krishna, the Upanishadic sages, whoever it may be, Lao Tzu, Santa Teresa, Hildegard of Bingen, John of the Cross, whoever it is. And just enjoy being a kind of nexus of this blessings that are flowing to you in the form of rainbows of light, and being a source of light for all the other beings, and then being egged on by them to be more so, just as you send your prayers toward those beings you consider capable of blessing you. This is what's known in Tibetan as the refuge tree, or the refuge field contemplation. And it's considered very critical in any meditation to sort of create a setting, an imaginary setting around yourself like this, a kind of holographic, visualized, like shrine, I think of it as a shrine space that you kind of carry around in your imagination for when you meditate, so that you don't go into meditating with a kind of unexamined self-image of yourself as easily distracted or whatever it is, whatever one's self-image is in regard to meditating. You kind of imagine yourself as really able to do it and enjoying it. And then when you don't always meditate on it, it's like you come into a room, pleasant room, and you feel happy to be in the room, kind of look around a bit, but then you just do whatever you do in the room. You don't constantly scan the room. So this is a space that you visualize like that, and then you just feel you're in that space. And you feel all these enlightened beings and helpful beings and loving beings who are loving toward you are just sending you their support and encouragement. And you have a sense of how you share your own state with everyone around you, your good vibes, as it were. And then they encourage that in you, and you encourage those ones who love you to be like that. So it just becomes a way you feel that supports whatever other thing, whether you meditate on compassion or renunciation or wisdom or whatever it may be. You put yourself in this good state. And then when you close the session of meditation, you can do one of two things. You can either just leave that field, sort of assume to be there with you while you're on the whole retreat. So you're sort of in that, even when you're eating or walking or talking or resting, even sleeping. Or you can dissolve it each time. And the way you dissolve it is you imagine that the medicine Buddha and all of the other healing beings up in the sky, your particular host of concern, that they are so thrilled to see you in retreat and in self-development and in that pleasure. And they flow toward you and they merge with your being. and they sort of decide to reside in your heart, something like that. Just as beings that have loved us in the past, even if they passed away, they still somehow are with the beings that they love. And then you take their example, and then you melt your ideal meditating self down into pure light, because you want to bless all the beings around you, all the beings. And you want to pass on that blessing you received. And so you just completely let yourself go into being melted into light and flow into being the energy of all the other beings, limitlessly. And then I always have a thing where someone who knows me, either likes or dislikes, says, "Hey, where did he go?" He was up there meditating, where did he disappear to? And then ding, meditation is over. Okay, so those are two ways. So you can keep it open the whole time, or you can, and while you're here with Menla anyway, you can dissolve it when you reach Route 28. Okay, Dr. Mark.
So this is an amazing place, as you can probably feel already. And it's a kind of retreat that we're doing tonight, tomorrow, Sunday morning, not a silent retreat. So it's a communal retreat where we're all here together. Bob sometimes talks about doing a meditation where you imagine you're in a subway car with everybody, and the subway stops and you're there all together forever, and you have to get along. So the retreat's a little bit like that. I want to give you something of an overview tonight of what I am hoping it will yield, what the retreat will yield, at least from, well, certainly from my side, but I think from our interaction, based on our history. I come from a kind of unusual place in that, I'm a psychiatrist, those of you who don't know that, and mostly what I do is individual therapy with people. But I had the good fortune, I would say, of learning about Buddhism, being exposed to Buddhism, finding really great, important for me Buddhist teachers when I was quite young, in my late teens, early 20s, before I really was cognizant about anything much in the world. Certainly before I knew anything about Western psychology. I had the vague idea that I would become a therapist, but only because it seemed like work that wasn't really work, which has turned out to be work that isn't really sitting and talking to interesting people. So that worked out. But I was really excited about Buddhism and went as deeply into it as I could early, before really coming to terms with the fact that my father was a doctor and everyone always wanted me to go to medical school, and once I was secure in my Buddhist posture, then that allowed me in a way to come to terms with the doors that were open to me. So I studied psychology, went to medical school, became a psychiatrist. But I've been interested the whole time. I always feel like I've looked at Western psychiatry, psychoanalytic thought through a Buddhist lens. And there are many more commonalities than there are differences, at least from my point of view. So what I'm hoping to do this weekend is a couple of things. First, one great thing about Buddhism is that there's this idea of Buddha nature that's inherent in all of us, and it's there already. So I would like you to come away with a little glimmer of that possibility. And there are a couple of people here I know who over the years have spent time with Ram Dass. Psychology professor Richard Alpert at Harvard before I was there, LSD, India, a early teacher of mine, a big influence of mine, who knew me in those early years when I was first learning about Buddhism, and then who I didn't lose touch with but didn't see for about 20 years. And after I was already writing books and working as a therapist and so on, I paid him a visit after he'd had a stroke, probably 25 years ago or so now. But I remember him asking me, like sort of with a twinkle in his eye, making fun of me a little bit, saying to me, oh, so are you a Buddhist psychiatrist now? And I was like, well, I guess I am. And he was, well, do you see them? He said, sort of slowly, because he'd had a stroke and the words were slow to come, but his mind was fine. Do you see them? He said to me, do you see them as already free? And at first I didn't get what he was saying, but then a beat later, I did. Do you see them, meaning my patients? Do you see them as already free? And while I couldn't have said at that point, I couldn't have found the words for that, he was still good with the words, which was always his great forte. But I think the answer is yes, actually, always was yes from the beginning, because of the Buddhist thing that was, stirred around in me early. So that's the first thing. I'd like you to have a sense of that.
The Buddha nature of
the
Ram Dass himself.
Yes, Ram Dass himself reaching for it.
That's amazing.
But understanding that the role of the therapist, in trying to combine these worlds, that the role of the therapist is not with interpretation, not necessarily with words, not saying it explicitly, but somehow, and this I find endlessly, what's the word, encouraging or stimulating, exciting even, in my work, to try to find devious ways, of trying to convey that to the people who I'm working with. So I would like that for this, if any of you get a glimpse of that this weekend, that would be great. The second thing that I want to emphasize is that emotional life of all kinds, difficult emotions, pleasurable, wonderful emotions, that emotional life in particular is worthwhile. Not to be leapfrogged over in a reach for transcendence, not to be dissociated from, out of fear, but that emotional life of all kinds, and this, of course, is the work, at least I think for many people, certainly for me, the work of therapy, but that I think it can be the work of meditation also, and it's another place where these worlds not just overlap, but maybe are the same. That emotional life of whatever complexity, whatever type, however difficult, however potentially overwhelming in a good or difficult way, is as good an object of meditation as any other, and that the Western psychoanalytically, psychodynamically influenced world is particularly good at finding ways of creating a mental space or a emotional space in which that can happen. And I think that's one of the great points of confluence between Buddhist ways of dealing with the mind and Western psychodynamic ways of dealing with the mind, is that both psychotherapy and meditation have the potential for creating what I'm going to fear, displacement, etc., that in ordinary life often accompanies it. So that's That's the second thing. And what's the third thing?
So those are your objectives?
Yeah, there's one more objective.
Okay.
Yes,
One more.
the third objective is that I'd like to be able to convey through my words or through pulling it from Bob or from all of you, or from poetry or music or whatever we end up talking about, art, a kind of Buddhist, what I think of as a Buddhist sensibility, which I think comes into the Eightfold Path. That Buddhism, when a lot of people come to a thing like this thinking that it might be all about meditation, which is maybe why Bob doesn't want to always start with a meditation, but that it's not just about meditation, it's not just about mindfulness, it's not just about relaxation or stress reduction or stress relief. It's actually about a whole way of living a life. And that way of living a life has something to do with getting over yourself, because the ordinary way of living a life is to make it be all about you in a kind of small way. But to find the stance or the posture that Buddhism, I think, is always in its various ways trying to describe and evoke, if we can come away from the weekend with a clearer sense of that, even though it's almost impossible to actually find the right words to describe it, then I would be happy. So I want to read one thing, and then the other thing I want to say is, because I'm a therapist, some of you, certainly not all of you, but some of you may have come to the weekend with some kind of personal or private agenda. Something that you might want to pull me aside to talk to me about, or pull Bob aside to talk to him about. And I would encourage you, there's always that temptation, but I would encourage you, and I want to make a little bit of time tonight to go around. If people are coming, if there's anything in your mind that brought you here, personal, emotional, or not, say it in the room. Say it in the room for everybody, because people always think, oh, it's so personal and it's only about me, but we're all dealing with the same stuff. We're all dealing with what the Buddha called the 3 marks of existence, which is, the main one being impermanence, the other main one being suffering, and the third one being questions about identity, like, is there a self, is there not a self, who am I supposed to be, etc. So let me read you this thing I want to read. When I first discovered Buddhism, so I took a class my freshman year in college, Introduction to World Religion, which I had no interest in, and had not planned to take this class. But I met a girl in the first week of school who was taking the class, and I followed her into it. And the first semester of the class was Eastern religion, and the second semester was Western religion. It was taught by W. Cantwell Smith. Remember that guy? Yeah. Ancient professor of religion. But when we got to the Buddhism part, we read the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada, for those of you who don't know, is a collection of Buddhist verse, inspiring Buddhist verse meant for householders, not for monks or nuns. So it was accessible to
sayings of the Buddha. Yeah.
Sayings of the Buddha, yeah. Like little poems, really. And it was a very good translation. I've since read a lot of different versions of the Dhammapada, and none of them were as good as this translation, which was by a Bengali visiting professor at Hofstra named P. Lal, who I later corresponded with, because in almost all of my books I quoted from this particular verse, which is a verse about mind. And he lived in Calcutta and had a little press in Calcutta.
Really?
Yeah, in every book I wrote, I would write and ask him permission to quote from this, and he would say, "Fine, just send me $50 in the mail," which I did.
What's the name? What's his name?
P. Lal. I don't know I can't remember what the P.
Lal?
But yeah, L-A-L.
Mm-hmm.
He's deceased now, but anyway, so this is the chapter on mind, which was the first thing to inspire me. Like an archer and arrow, the wise man, we'll say man for the moment, like an archer and arrow, the wise man steadies his trembling mind, a fickle and restless weapon. Flapping like a fish thrown on dry ground, it trembles all day, struggling to escape from the snares of Mara the tempter. So this was the first thing that I really related to, the trembling mind. Flapping like a fish thrown on dry ground, I was like, yes, that I can relate to that. And Mara is a character in the Buddhist story. The devil or the ego is actually a god who is the tempter, but he represents in a psychoanalytic interpretation of the Buddhist story, he represents the Buddha's ego tempting him. The mind is restless, to control it is good. A disciplined mind is the road to nirvana. The road to nirvana, which is the Eightfold Path, is also the road to nirvana. Look to your mind, wise man. Look to it well. It is subtle, invisible, treacherous. A disciplined mind is the road to nirvana. So you got a hint of that in the meditation that we did already, when setting the mindfulness in front of you and then turning back and looking and where are you, you know?
You particularly like that.
I love that. Subtle, but I love also subtle, invisible, treacherous, the mind. Swift, single, nebulous, it sits in the cave of the heart. Who conquers it frees himself from slavery. No point calling him wise, whose mind is unsteady, who is not serene, who does not know the Dharma. The Dharma is the Buddha's teachings in its entirety. Call him wise, whose mind is calm, whose senses are controlled, who is unaffected by good and evil, who is wakeful. He knows the body for what it is, a frail jar. He makes his mind firm like a fortress. He attacks Mara with the weapon of wisdom. He guards what he conquers jealously. And I always liked that there was a place for jealousy in the Buddhist teachings. It is not long before the body, bereft of breath and feeling, lies on the ground, poor thing, like a burnt-out cinder. And this being the 50th anniversary of Woodstock, we know how quickly time passes. No hate can hurt, no foe can harm, as hurts and harms a mind ill-disciplined. Neither father, mother, nor relative, and I always add therapist, can help as helps a mind that is well-disciplined. So the disciplining of the mind, that is one of the functions of meditation, but also also of therapy.
Oh, the mic died?
Yeah, the mic. No, it's not dying, it's just feeding back.
Well,
yes.
my mark,
Yes, it's all her work.
so I can take over.
You can take over.
But we must fix it though. So, well, I just wanted to say something. Originally tonight, usually when we have our weekend, our August weekend, which we have when Mark comes back from Maine, where he's experimenting with cold water. If you read his books, you know what I'm talking about. He actually wants to say what they want to get out of the weekend or what they're here about. We will make a space. I'm going to say something first for a few minutes, and then we can make space to do that. But I was thinking, I had an idea while you were talking, since you really like to do that. and I think it's a good idea, that you all are journalers, so you know about, like, some of you make notes, some of you can. Anyone who wants to could write, just like a card, library card, of like your main purposes, yourself, anything you want to say about yourself, and your main purposes of the weekend. And then at the end of tonight, you could put it here on this table, and then we can look at it, and other students can look at it as if you had a chance to talk to everybody. And just leave them here. People can come and riff through them and see all the other people. And then, or I like to, who's that? And then they can find the other person. So I thought we would try that as a way of communicating and being here together. And then I thought I would talk a minute about myself. It was, you reminded me, but what I want to say about your thing, in a way, what it is that Buddhism, although you were told it was a religion by your people in your school, and you found it in a world religion, quote unquote, class, like something that some other people believe in, as if, because religion is defined in the West as something you believe in. But really, it wasn't something you believe in. It's some part of your education, actually, it became. Because when you saw it in that setting, what you're interested in was a kind of discipline, a learning, a way of dealing with your mind. And what made me remember was that, when I was an undergraduate, before I ran away to go to India and be a monk, and leave my family and so forth, before I lost an eye. I had a midlife crisis at 20, I think, basically you can say. And which was lucky because I wasn't that decrepit yet. And what I had in mind, and what I would tell sometimes people or myself, is there must be some culture or some knowledge where they have a better yoga of the emotions. I used to use that expression, I remember a long time in those days, because I felt that I had people trying to send me to shrinks here, there, and I went and talked to some. But I read Freud, like tons of Freud and Jung and Wilhelm Reich, and I took a class with Erik Erikson, the 7 stages of formation of identity and the whole thing about the identity crisis. And he was a glorious guy with white hair, like a wonderful man. And although he had a problem, I'll say later. But that was what it was. It was looking for somebody that had a better yoga of the emotions. Yeah. And I thought it would be in India. And so I wasn't one of those who was like just a Tibet fanatic, wanted to go to Shangri-La. But although now we've arrived in a kind of Shangri-La. But so that's the first thing I thought. And so to me, it was my dissatisfaction with my St. Bernard's, Exeter, Harvard education that drew me to this system. And in a way, I was pleased that it wasn't a religion where I was told you have to believe in something, Although there were some things, some sort of common sense things that were different from materialism, which one we were all educated in the Church of Materialistic Scientism, actually, as Wilford Kempton Smith would say, or Houston Smith would say. So that just connected me a little bit to what you were saying, what you were talking about. I think I was about a decade ahead of you or something like that. Yeah. I think I am about it. Yeah. I was a decade or behind you, could even say. But ahead or behind, doesn't matter. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing, what I'm fascinated in this particular event, since Mark wrote that book of Getting Over Yourself, of advice not given, based on the Eightfold Path. And I have a book, although it's not published yet, and it's finally in the editor's hands, has been for some time, which is called, the working title is Buddhas Have More Fun. But not Buddhists. Buddhas have more fun. And that's, I don't know about the subtitle. I mean, your subtitle is the best, getting over yourself. Although I was thinking, taking over yourself might be what I would say. Because in a way, getting over yourself from a Buddhist point of view kind of means where you realize, it's not where you realize what people wrongly think Buddhism is trying to do, which is get rid of yourself. Which is why psychoanalysts up to now, and I think even still a majority, probably even today, are afraid of Buddhism because they think someone who gets involved in that, they'll go somewhere and meditate, and then they'll forget who they are, and they'll never find out. they'll be all disorganized. Their lives will become disorganized, and they won't be able to, pull themselves together and have like a reasonable narrative, self-structuring, restructuring, positive narrative, right? Which I think is the aim of the talking cure, I think, right? Getting rid of the bad narratives and getting into a better one. And but that's a wrong idea about Buddhism. The discovery of selflessness, which they call, is actually the liberation of the handling of the relative self. Because our relative self, in the Buddha's analysis, as a doctor, not as a religious founder, as a doctor, our relative self is suppressed within an image of a fixed self that we're indoctrinated to have by culture, that we also instinctually adopt as a human being, based on previous biology, which from a Buddhist point of view is not just the biology of our genes, it's also the biology of ourselves, having lived as other kinds of beings. That's how come that's why we're like chimpanzees. We all were chimpanzees, personally. So therefore, we just have a little less hair nowadays and a little more complicated syntax and language. But we're still a little chimp-like, I think. Isn't that so? Maybe some of you are not, but I think most humans are. And no tail, though, which I lament. I'm very jealous of the guy in Avatar who got himself a nice big tall blue body with a wonderful tail, and he could climb trees in the most marvelous way. I thought it was really great to have a tail like that. Sleep in a hammock high in a tree. But anyway, so that's the, yeah. So there's no being nobody. And I was so happy when Ram Dass said, "You see them already free," because he used to have a thing where he would say that, and in that famous moment where Jack Engler said it with the Dalai Lama came from, Ram Dass used to say that too. He used to say, Western psychology takes people who think they're nobody and makes them think they're somebody. And Buddhist psychology fits well with it because it takes people who think they're somebody and makes them realize they're nobody. And which I objected to, but the Dalai Lama shut me up. He said, just let him talk. He said, just listen. Don't refute right away. And in that particular conference, the first Buddhist science conference we had at Amherst College, 1984. And so that's important, in other words. In other words, what we are already is relative selves, because we are relational beings. Everything is interrelated with everything else. And but we have the problem, we make the mistake of thinking we're a fixed thing, and that therefore our relationship with other things is kind of problematic. And unfortunately, most spiritualities, including many versions of Buddhist spirituality, although I don't think Buddha's version, but many others' version of it, is that there really is this fixed way of being, and that fixed way of being should be a separate way of being from the relative way, which is filled with bumps and problems. And that therefore the whole purpose is to escape into that fixed way, and that's what nirvana is. Nirvana is someplace outside the world where you can be in a fixed state of happiness, which some more perceptive people, an artist friend of mine, why I would never have used Buddha's Have More Fun as a title to a book until recently, because I was always stymied by something someone said to me I think in the 70s, where they said, well, if nirvana is like perfect happiness all the time, how utterly boring. That's really terrible. It's like saying the whole universe is ultimately just like a jar of Vaseline, which might indicate to you something about that gentleman. But an artist, actually, nice departed since. But and in a way that was it. So in other words, the pleasure and joy comes from the release from suffering. So it has to do with the contrast. In other words, it's an idea. So it has to be a release. And if it's just pure release and there's nothing to be released from, then it's nothing. He was saying, right? He was imagining. So I would have had that because in a way, I think what is really strange problem, by definition, I mean, I don't even know if it's true, but that's what they think, and that's what I think, because I've come to see it like that. And that is, when you become a Buddha, you discover you are still yourself, but you're also everybody else. And when you discover that you are yourself and everybody else, imagine if you suddenly felt you were everyone in this room, And it was you yourself feeling that you were everyone in this room. It would be kind of really confusing, wouldn't it? It would be terribly confusing. And yet, apparently, when you do that, you feel really great. But then what you come to notice is that other people, a lot of them don't feel so great. And so you develop a double vision of them. You see them as already free because you are them. And the way you are them is the way they really are, which is really a bundle of bliss. And then you notice, because you're totally them, so you notice it the way they notice it, they feel like a pile of dung quite often. Or, miserable, or back pain, or having stenosis of some piece of their skeleton and their nerves. And therefore they feel terrible. And so, because of that double vision, apparently, Buddha has the ultimate therapeutic skill, is the ultimate physician, because it's like a living CAT scan of the situation of the patient. But sees them in both ways, sees them of the health, the joy, the bliss, the well-being that's in them, that is their health actually, to whatever degree it's there, and also sees the obstacles to it, which they call addictive emotions and notions, ignorance, desire, hate, jealousy, pride, etc. So they have a list of them. And so the point is, then that's where Buddha has more fun. The Buddha has no longer if you become a Buddha, when you become a Buddha, and if anybody already is, then please let us know if that's correct. And you are completely happy, and you don't need any more release of any kind. You're like in a matrix of total happiness. And you see other beings also that way, but you do not neglect that they don't see themselves that way. So somehow you have the ultimate skill of helping them discover themselves in that similar matrix, a shift of matrices, all being relative, all of it being relative. And so that's where you have more fun, because there's more other beings than just you, and they're more miserable, and they get a lot of release if you're a skillful physician. And so you're having more fun as them, being relieved from suffering, than you could possibly have just being relieved yourself from suffering. So you're not too bored with never suffering. So you're not like the Frenchmen, the famous Frenchmen, French intellectuals, who attacked poor dear Mathieu Ricard, one of our happiest Buddhists, who has been verified by EEGs that he's really happy, supposedly. And he's always happy. He's being attacked by French intellectuals who they think it's really stupid to take away their suffering. What? What? Ma souffrance? Mais non. I like my suffering. Go wild, go wild, go wild. Calvados, Calvados, Calvados. Then the occasional filet de sole. Le café de magot. Anyway, he has a lot of trouble from that. He wrote a tome on happiness like this, trying to defend it from this strong cultural force there in France. So I'm hoping that we can a little bit look at these two. Unfortunately, it's not fair because mine has not already been published. That's my fault. Dawdling around with it, but getting too old or something to finish it. But these two kind of versions of the Eightfold Path, which I think are very complementary. Actually, I really do. So don't be afraid. This relates to my final thing. I would like everyone here to know, and make as a takeaway from right away, that. But it takes a little more time discussing it, so it will be for the objective here. That emptiness, the famous Buddhist emptiness, which is an equivalent of selflessness or voidness, etc., these terms, they are different from nothingness. They have words for nothingness in those languages. These are not nothingness. Nothingness, luckily, is nothing. Emptiness is the condition of relativity of all things. It means that all things or mental things, spiritual things, physical things, are empty of any non-relative component. Because the idea of anything having a non-relative component, or even of being in a non-relative context, there being a framework or something, is just incoherent, because if it's non-relative, it's irrelevant, and it doesn't relate to the relative. So the discovery of emptiness by the Buddha, and its elaboration and unfolding through several thousand years now, is the discovery of relativity, actually. And it is a scientific discovery and an educational discovery. And really, a synonym, it sounds less scary, but they like it to be a little scary, actually. But it sounds, if you call it openness, which is another possible translation for it. Even the word freedom. If you realize that freedom is a negation, freedom negates bondage. So it's opposite of bondage, freedom. It's like space. Space is a double negation, absence of impenetrable things. So emptiness is a term like that, which basically undergirds your entry into true relativity. When you enter into true relativity, there are two things which we will be working on here from my point of view. One of them is that there's no limit to the positive that you are capable of, and that is available to you as a wonderful human being, no matter what your age, no matter what your background, no matter what your religion, no matter what your philosophy, whatever it is. So since everything is relative, everything changes, there's no limit to the positive change. On the other side, there's a little sense of danger, because if you just let it go, it can get really bad. That's what we're noticing in the whole country, or even planet nowadays. If you just let it go, and then they think there's nothing you can do about it, just let it go the way it seems to want to go. That negative momentum seems to go in an endlessly bad direction, right? So that's my statement, okay? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to read things tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Although I would like to read from the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, but I'm not going to read tonight. I'm going to read tomorrow. Okay. I can describe what I would like to read, just, which is that, in the noble truth of suffering. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, how many of you know the Four Noble Truths right off? Could you show of hands?
Not that many.
Okay, maybe half. So that's an objective. This Eightfold Path that Mark uses, and it fits in this thing they call. And by the way, they don't have to call them truths. Why did the 19th century translators, start this thing with the Noble Truths? Which is not wrong. But why did they pick that? The same word satya can mean a reality or a fact. It doesn't have to be a truth. If they called it the Four Noble Facts, it would be more like it in a way, because it's like a diagnosis.
Just back up from it for the people who don't know. For the people who don't know about the Four Noble Truths.
Yes.
The core Buddhist psychological teaching is centered in the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah, not just psychological, any kind of
teaching is centered in the Four Noble Truths. So.
But the reason they had to translate it as truth is because they thought it was a religion, and then a religion has to have something to be believed. But the Four Noble Truths does not ask you to believe them. It asks you to understand them. So it's completely different. It says even it discourages you from trying to believe them, in a sense, in the sense of that has to be that. But then that's how people misunderstand Buddhism. They think they should believe the First Noble Truth, which is that the unenlightened life is suffering. The poor Pope, three popes, maybe two, maybe I don't know about Francis, but the previous two popes were so upset about feeling Buddhists must be so miserable, all of them, really, what a horrible religion they wrote that in their book, in that they're taught that everything is suffering. And that's not what Buddha's discovery is, that there's only nirvana. That's the real of the Four Noble Facts. The realest one, the only really real one, is nirvana. The others are only relatively real. It's not there's no suffering, but it isn't that's what it has to be. And he never would have used the first noble fact if it wasn't that he wants to spend. It's like Socrates saying the unexamined life is not worth living. That's pretty depressing. Buddha never said that unenlightened life will be not worth living. It will be extremely worth living, especially if you're human, although it will be frustrating if you insist on being unenlightened. The reason he said that it will be frustrating is to get you to be enlightened. I mean, get off me. I shouldn't act like I'm not. I'm at least enlightened. But that's the thing. So these are 4 facts that he used as a framework to diagnose his first students, who were 5 people who hadn't had a square meal in 6 years, who hadn't shaved or washed or cut their fingernails or hair in that same length of time, who exposed themselves to the elements, living kind of naked in the woods more or less. And he looked at them and he said, when he found them, he said, "This is suffering." Not exactly a statement of genius. He didn't say the world, he didn't say life, he just said this. And he was looking at them. And actually he was a little bit floating a few inches over the ground, according to the narrative. And then he said that has a cause, which you can understand. And actually the reality, though, is you can be free of it. And he indicated that he had become so. Actually, he didn't shrink from indicating that. And then, so that's the second is the cause. So it's the acknowledgement of the symptom, the diagnosis of the cause, the prognosis of the cure, which is that nirvana is your true condition, and you can discover that yourself. And then the Eightfold Path is the therapy, and is the method to come to that discovery. But the path, the negative situation and the path of education, three levels of education, as he described it himself, to overcome the therapy is educational type therapy. Then the result is the reality. The result is a return to the actual reality, which is to start with, which Ram Dass is referring. I'm so thrilled that he said that. He asked you that. That's so thrilling. Oh, he's so. I have to tell a funny story, if I might, just quickly before I stop. Ram Dass, Mark got me invited. I know Ram Dass too from before you did. I think actually. In his acid days, I was one of the undergraduates around at Harvard. And I go back that far. We're both very ancient. He's more ancient than me, though, Ram Dass. And so I knew him, and then, we know each other. He thinks of me as a Buddhist, and, he hadn't invited me particularly to one of his retreats. And Mark got him to, because Mark told him, Ram Dass has been very frustrated the last decade, at least, in that he says, I'm a Hindu. And, we have souls, we Hindus. And we have selves or souls, Atma, however you want to translate it, he says. But all my friends are Buddhists. And they tell me I can't have one. So it's very upsetting. But they're my friends. And then Mark told them maybe I can help them out. So that's the first thing he asked me. We're on stage, at one of his retreats, and he says, okay, what about the soul? And what about Buddhist and Hindu? And he repeated that to me. He said, I'm a Hindu, and all my friends are Buddhists. And what about Hindu?
I told him that Bob said it was time to bring back the soul.
Right. So then I couldn't help, but I channeled. So I said, well, Ram Dass, I'm going to channel Yogi Berra. And he looked alert when he heard the word yogi, and then I guess he remembered he was the New York Yankees catcher after a while. And then I said his famous Dharma teaching saying, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. He really liked that. I like the yogi. He kept saying that during the rest of the retreat, wondering how he liked the yogi. But the basic thing is that, the Westerners who first started translating the Buddhist texts in the 19th century were atheist materialists that thought themselves as scientists and practical and secular humanists sort of type. So they've dumped the soul along with spirit and mind, as you've noticed, those of you who've been educated scientifically, and because to get out of being sent to hell by some preacher, and they don't like that. So they're just going to, when they die, they're going to be scot-free from or whatever they did while they were alive. and just be nothing, which is the ground of reality, they think, which is not quite sane, actually, but that's what they think. And so then they said, okay, they saw the selflessness teaching in Buddhism, anatma, and they said, good, we're not going to, here's a religion, spiritual thing, that doesn't have a self, so there's no soul. So they discovered that there's no soul, and therefore they muttered about rebirth, maybe having to do with the culture, but really they don't believe in it because there's no self, so there's nothing to be reborn. So they misunderstood Buddhism like that. Whereas Buddhism, the idea of being cut off from reality by entering nothing, by thinking that nothing is the absolute condition of things, in a sense, is another one of these incoherent, making nothingness into an absolute that is crippling to human beings from Buddha's analytic point of view, his therapeutic point of view. And, it took me 40 years of arguing with scientific materialists on my campus and so forth to realize, to introduce them to a news flash. Guys, nothing is nothing. It's not there. Therefore, nobody discovered it. So it's not a scientific fact. So your sense that that's where you're going is a sign of major blind faith delusion. Because there's no empirical evidence for the existence of nothing. Because it doesn't exist. And nobody will ever find it, therefore. Not only haven't they never will. So relativity is the default expectation, in fact. It's not a mystical belief, it's the default expectation. You better handle it. So anyway, I told him. So soul can be spoken of as the super subtle mind continuum, which from the very earliest Buddhist teachings, Chitta Santana, it's called, it's in every Pali text, in every early Sanskrit text even. And so Ramdas was happy if I have a soul again. He's got it. He's ready to go with it. But luckily he's keeping it here with us all and inspiring us in his way. Showing, the way he lives in that suffering body. Yeah. But yet he has some kind of bliss somewhere left over from some high dose that makes him able to do it. Okay, that's my point. Okay, so then anybody who has a strong wish to say now what you expect, what you're looking for, what you want, we have a few minutes. We would love to hear it. And everybody can write a small piece of paper, paragraph or two, or 2 paragraphs, and put it in the middle of this table, if they like, and we'll read it. I promise. Okay, and then that's a way of expressing yourself from your journaling, and then you have a sense if there's anybody. Yeah. And okay.
I had a therapist for many years who would start every session with, "What's with you today, Mark?"
What's with you? What?
What's with you? What's with you, Mark? He's like, instead of like, how are you?
What's with you?
What's with
you? Mm-hmm. Actually, the Tibetans, when they say, how are you, they say, Kusud devo yube. And they say, is your body happy? That's what they say. They don't say, are you suffering?
They're like Reichians.
What?
They're Reichians.
Yeah. They say, are you, Kusud devo yube. That's honorific. Is your body happy? Devo means at ease, or you could, happy maybe it's too emphatic. You could say, is your body at ease?
So it's always very hard to start, in a...
Yeah, you don't have to, nobody has to.
You don't have to.
You can meditate.
In terms of getting over
Okay,
yourself.
this gentleman, he's the brave one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. I have a little question that came
Well,
up.
no, you have to hold up the mic.
Give a shot. On my drive here, I was thinking about being on the eve of 2020.
Yes.
Buddhism and psychotherapy having 2 different histories. And let me preface my question by saying that maybe 20 years ago or so, I heard somebody say that the average Sunday New York Times had more information in it than what a man would gather in a lifetime 100 years earlier. Yeah. And now, in my pocket, I have a phone that has more information in it than all the New York Times combined times 1,000. And I wondered how this age of information, which is really coming at us 24/7 and is so seductive, it's almost like a mind seductress. How psychotherapy and Buddhism can work with this age of infinite information that's coming at us and is so seductive.
Right. Well, I don't know. Not everything is not seductive. I mean, the New York Times may have some ads from Craigslist and so forth, but it also has a lot of irrelevant stuff, unless you're specifically looking for this and that, you know. So there's a lot of horrifying and annoying stuff in all of that vast information in that phone, you know. It's a lot of, you know, like Fox News is in the phone too, you know. And not just, you know, the opera or something, you know. So I think that, I don't think it's really that different, but in a way I would say Buddhism really likes the vast flow of information. I think it likes it. You could say Facebook is almost like a global awareness. It's like you can't avoid knowing. I recently went to Al Gore's Climate Reality Project training in Minneapolis. He held it there. And he gives this lecture, which he then gives you the materials to give yourself, a version of it. I haven't downloaded the PowerPoints yet. But when you see, for example, everything that's happening to the climate crisis everywhere simultaneously, like the drought in this part of Africa and the typhoons in that part of Africa, and this thing in Paris and that thing in Greenland and another thing in Australia and another thing in Japan, and you see the early immediate footage of all this stuff. The fires in Alaska, it really, really puts you on edge. It's not at all seductive, it's terrifying. And that's good that it does that, because then we're not going to sit here contributing to it passively. We're going to insist that it be taken care of. And the climate criminals will finally be brought to justice by us, eventually, no question. We will have to. We'll have to try. They might kill us, but we'll keep trying. And they've killed a lot of people already. We have to help them not kill many more people by delaying dealing with it. So the vastness of information is nothing but enhancing the need for therapy to get rid of the ignorance of people. And in a way, it's just the knowing reality. This is my slogan, that what I meant by nirvana is the real reality. If that is the case, if Buddha's therapy is based on a correct empirical discovery, which he discovered, and actually many people since have ratified that in their own discoveries, not me, I'm still theoretically only dealing with it, but a lot of people have ratified, millions of people maybe, over history, that reality is fine, is good, is great. Well, unreality is terrible, destructive, and people just behave like they don't know who they are, what they are, and what they're doing. So that leads the idea that the more you know reality, the better off you are. So therefore, the real slogan is, Buddhism is realism. You know, we have that statement, ignorance is bliss. So Buddhism says realism is bliss. Ignorance is suffering. It's the opposite, right? So don't worry about model.
In terms of the cell phones,
Okay.
when cell phones first came out and they were ringing all the time, I used to do these meditations where I would tell everyone to turn their cell phones on, and so that they would ring randomly. And the meditation would be about the cell phones entering into everybody's consciousness, group consciousness, you know. Because we all, you know, not we all, a lot of people have this idea of, oh my God, age of information, too much, got to shut it out, you know, go to a pristine place. And that's wonderful to be able to shut it out sometimes. Like I was in Maine on this island with, you know, back to nature and so on. But the point is to be able to relate, like Bob's saying, you know, to not having to close yourself off from any aspect of reality.
Yes.
to trust them.
Actually, I thought you were going to say, Mark, you know Thich Nhat Hanh thing about when the phone rings. Do you know that one? The great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. And I really like that. Here's the thing, when the phone rings, never pick up on the first ring. What you do is you think, oh, someone wants to talk to me. And then you bow to the person who's ringing on the phone. And then the second ring, you similarly do not pick up. And you think, how can I serve this person? What can I do for them? What do they need? It's wonderful that they're contacting me. And then you pick up on the third ring. And if they're really impatient and they're really freaked out, maybe they won't ring 3 times. And you're detached to that degree that you're okay about that. And so then by the 13th ring, hello. You come out, that's his voice. I really like that. He's wonderful.